Some of the strongest plants in your garden don't die from cold. They don't die from drought. They don't die from pests. They die from you. And the crazy part, most people don't even realize they're slowly weakening their so-called immortal plants every single harvest. Perennials are marketed like they're indestructible. Plant once, harvest forever. No replanting, no problem. But that's only half the story. Yes, they come back every year. Yes, they get stronger with time. But only if you harvest them correctly. If you're new here on PermaYield, this channel is about building gardens that improve with time instead of collapsing from small mistakes. So if you care about long-term strength, not just quick harvests, hit like and subscribe right now. It helps more than you think and keeps this kind of content coming. It sounds obvious, but it rarely feels obvious in the moment. The plant looks big, leaves are full, stems are strong, so you take more, and maybe just a little more because it looks fine. But perennial plants store energy differently than annuals. Annual crops are designed to grow fast, produce, and die. They push everything into one season. Perennials are different. They store energy in roots, crowns, and underground structures to survive winter and regrow next year. Every time you harvest aggressively, you're removing part of the plant's ability to recharge that underground battery. Take asparagus, for example. The first year after planting, you shouldn't harvest at all. The second year, only lightly. Why? Because the plant needs to build deep root reserves. If you cut spears too early or too often, the plant survives, but it never reaches full strength. Yields shrink over time instead of increasing. The same mistake happens with perennial kale and tree collards. People cut the plant down heavily because it keeps regrowing, but constant heavy cutting forces the plant into stress mode. Stress reduces root expansion. Smaller roots mean weaker regrowth next season. And here's something most gardeners never connect. Smaller roots also mean weaker soil improvement. Remember, on PermaYield, we talk about perennials as soil builders, but they can only build if they're allowed to develop. Another silent killer. Harvesting too low. With plants like perennial onions or walking onions, cutting too close to the base repeatedly damages growth points. Over time, crowns become weaker. Multiplication slows. Eventually, what used to spread naturally starts thinning out. Rhubarb is another classic example. Pulling every stalk because the plant looks huge weakens it long term. A good rule: never take more than 1/3 at a time. Leave enough foliage for photosynthesis. Leaves are not decoration. They're solar panels. Without those panels, roots starve. And root starvation doesn't show immediately. It shows next year when the plant emerges thinner, slower, less productive. This is where patience separates strong gardens from struggling ones. Perennials reward moderation. They punish greed. There's also timing. Harvesting at the wrong stage can shorten a plant's lifespan. Cutting perennial herbs right before a harsh freeze leaves them vulnerable. Removing too much foliage during extreme heat increases water stress. Timing matters more with long-lived plants because you're affecting multiple future seasons, not just one harvest. Think long-term every time you cut. Ask yourself one question: is this plant strong enough to handle this harvest? If you're unsure, take less. Perennials are not annual lettuce beds. They're infrastructure. They're investments. And investments grow when protected. But overharvesting isn't the only mistake quietly killing immortal plants. There's something even more damaging that most gardeners don't talk about, and it happens after the harvest. Here's the mistake that does more damage than overharvesting, and most people do it without thinking. They harvest and then they walk away. No recovery support, no protection, no adjustment. With annual crops, that might not matter. You pull the plant out at the end of the season anyway. But with perennials, every harvest is a wound, and wounds need recovery time. Let's talk about post-harvest neglect. When you cut a perennial, especially leafy greens or herbs, the plant immediately shifts energy into regrowth mode. That regrowth requires nutrients and moisture. If the soil is already dry, compacted, or depleted, the plant struggles to rebuild what you just removed. You don't always see it immediately. It might push out a few new leaves. It might look fine on the surface. But underground, the root system shrinks slightly to match the reduced energy supply. That's how decline begins. Something as simple as adding a light layer of compost or mulch after a heavy harvest can change everything. It stabilizes moisture. It feeds soil microbes. It cushions the root zone. Without that support, repeated harvesting slowly weakens the foundation. On PermaYield, we treat perennials like long-term assets. Assets need maintenance. Another quiet mistake is soil disturbance around established crowns. After harvesting, some gardeners start digging nearby, planting aggressively right against the base, or pulling weeds too roughly. Perennial root systems spread wider than most people realize. Damaging feeder roots near the surface weakens the plant, even if the top looks untouched. Imagine cutting someone's energy supply lines little by little. That's what rough soil disturbance does. Weed control matters too, but not in a violent way. Tearing weeds out forcefully around perennial roots can cause more harm than the weeds themselves. A better approach is cutting weeds at soil level and letting the roots decompose naturally. That protects the underground network. There's also the mistake of forcing late-season growth. Late in the growing season, many gardeners continue harvesting heavily because the plant still looks productive. But perennials need time to store energy before winter. If you keep cutting into late fall, the plant enters dormancy week. Weak dormancy means weaker spring growth. Asparagus ferns are a perfect example. After the main harvest, those tall feathery stalks should be left alone. They're rebuilding the root system for next year. Cutting them early because they look messy reduces next season's yield. The same principle applies to perennial herbs. Constant trimming into cold weather may look tidy, but it reduces winter resilience. Another common issue: ignoring division timing. Some perennials need to be divided every few years to stay vigorous. Rhubarb, certain perennial onions, even some clumping herbs benefit from occasional division. If you never divide overcrowded crowns, the center weakens, growth becomes thin, harvests shrink. But dividing at the wrong time, like during peak heat or just before frost, shocks the plant and slows recovery. Timing is everything. Watering habits matter too. Many gardeners treat perennials like drought-proof survivors. While established roots are deeper, repeated harvests increase water demand temporarily. If you harvest heavily and then reduce watering because it's a perennial, you create stress cycles. Stress cycles shorten lifespan. And here's a subtle one most people overlook: harvesting with dull tools. Tearing instead of cutting cleanly damages tissue. Jagged wounds invite disease. Clean cuts heal faster. It sounds small, but over years, clean harvesting makes a difference in plant health. Perennials aren't fragile, but they are responsive. They respond to moderation. They respond to protection. They respond to rhythm. And when that rhythm is broken repeatedly, through overcutting, neglect, rough soil handling, or bad timing, even so-called immortal plants slowly decline. But there's another category of mistake that kills perennials faster than anything we've talked about so far. It has nothing to do with cutting technique. It has to do with expectations. Most perennial plants don't fail because of bad soil. They fail because of bad expectations. People hear plant once, harvest forever, and assume that means zero strategy. They treat perennials like permanent decorations instead of living systems that need planning. One of the biggest mindset mistakes is planting perennials in temporary spaces. You'd be surprised how many gardeners put long-term plants in beds they plan to redesign next year. Then, when they want to expand, rotate crops, or move things around, they dig up established crowns too early. That shock can set a plant back for an entire season, sometimes longer. Perennials need stability. When you constantly relocate them, you interrupt root expansion. And remember, roots are the engine of everything we've talked about: soil improvement, resilience, yield. Another mistake: planting too close together because they look small in year one. In the first season, perennial vegetables don't take up much space, so people squeeze them in tightly. By year 2 or 3, they're competing for light, airflow, and nutrients. Crowding reduces vigor and increases disease pressure. Then the gardener blames the plant. But the problem wasn't the plant. It was impatience. Spacing is long-term thinking. You plant for what the plant will become, not what it looks like today. There's also the issue of mixing incompatible plants. Some gardeners plant aggressive spreaders right next to slow-developing perennials, mint next to asparagus, fast-spreading herbs beside young crowns. Over time, the aggressive plant wins. The slower one weakens. Immortal plants don't survive suffocation. Design matters more than people think. On PermaYield, we talk about building systems, not collections. A system considers sunlight patterns, water flow, root depth, and long-term growth size. When you ignore those factors, even strong perennials struggle. Here's another expectation mistake: chasing maximum harvest every season. Perennials thrive when given cycles of abundance and recovery. If you treat them like annual production machines and push for maximum output every year, you shorten their lifespan. Sometimes taking less this year means doubling strength next year. That's hard for people who want instant results. But long-term gardens reward restraint. There's also the set and forget myth. Yes, perennials require less work over time, but less work doesn't mean zero awareness. Ignoring pest buildup, never refreshing mulch, never observing changes in growth patterns, that neglect adds up. Strong gardens are low maintenance, not no maintenance. And here's a subtle but powerful mistake: never observing gradual decline. When you see early signs, reduced vigor, uneven growth, smaller leaves, that's the time to adjust. Add compost, reduce harvesting temporarily, improve drainage, divide if needed. Early correction saves years of productivity. There's also climate mismatch. Some perennials are labeled hardy, but microclimates vary. A plant that thrives in one region may struggle in another. Ignoring local conditions and forcing a plant outside its comfort zone leads to disappointment. Immortality has limits. Even soil chemistry matters. Some long-lived plants gradually acidify or alkalize their root zones. Without occasional testing or amendment, growth slows. It's subtle, but over years it becomes noticeable. The biggest takeaway here is this: perennial plants are long-term relationships. They respond to consistency, patience, and design. When expectations are unrealistic, when spacing is rushed, when systems are ignored, longevity suffers. But when perennials are placed intentionally, harvested moderately, and supported after cutting, they become stronger every season. There's one final piece to this puzzle. It's not about what you stop doing, it's about what you start doing differently from the very first harvest. Here's the shift that keeps perennial plants strong for decades instead of just a few seasons. You stop harvesting based on how much you want, and start harvesting based on how much the plant can afford. That sounds simple, but it changes everything. From the very first real harvest, set a rhythm. Never remove more than 1/3 of active growth at a time. That rule alone protects root reserves. Leaves aren't just for looks, they power the entire system underground. When you leave enough foliage, the plant rebuilds faster and stronger. After a heavier harvest, slow down. Give the plant space. Add a thin layer of compost or organic matter around the base, not buried against the crown, just enough to feed soil life. Water consistently for a short recovery window. You're helping it recharge. Then observe. Healthy perennials show you signs of strength: thick new shoots, deep leaf color, steady regrowth, speed. When growth slows noticeably, that's your signal to pause harvesting temporarily. Rotate your harvest zones too. Instead of cutting the entire plant evenly every time, alternate sections. Let one side recover while the other produces. This mimics natural grazing patterns and keeps the root system balanced. Seasonal awareness matters. As the growing season winds down, reduce cutting. Let the plant rebuild before dormancy. Going into winter strong is what determines how it performs next spring. And once every few years, reassess spacing. If crowns are overcrowded, divide them at the correct time, usually early spring or early fall, depending on the plant. Division isn't damage when done properly, it's renewal. Clean tools, gentle weed control, light mulch, moderate cuts, recovery time, observation. That's the rhythm. When you follow that rhythm, immortal plants truly become long-term producers. They don't just survive, they improve. Yields stabilize, soil improves. The plant matures into something dependable. And that's the core idea here on We're not chasing the biggest harvest this week. We're building gardens that still produce 10, 15, even 20 years from now. If this changed how you look at harvesting, drop a comment and tell me which perennial you think you may have been over harvesting. No judgment, most of us learn this the hard way. And if you know someone who thinks perennials can't fail, share this with them. It might save their plants before decline starts. Strong gardens aren't built by taking everything, they're built by knowing when to stop.